Well, thanks for picking this up, Dan, and reaching out to us, because we did issue a statement on our website today, an official statement, to clarify that there was a misrepresentation by some media about our monthly market report, which was issued, I believe, on the 12th of November last week, specifically regarding the messages and a narrative that was being created out of reading some of our numbers. For example, things related to the market being in a surplus next year, 2026, and the report said according to OPEC, or OPEC said, which is totally inaccurate and totally untrue. Our report does not say that at all. And we thought it was an imperative on us to actually come out and clarify this to everybody and make it clear that, we hope that the way people read our reports, it's a very basic report, nothing complex about it. It's very transparent, and it's been issued for years now on a monthly basis. And we were surprised, actually, to see those messages coming out of it, looking into 2026, or even focusing on some small adjustments to non-OPEC plus supply, an adjustment of 100,000 barrels a day for the year 2025, which is nothing compared to the bigger scheme of things when we talk about a global oil market of over 100 million barrels a day. And then to frame that and spin that around into saying that OPEC foresees a surplus in 2025 and goes further to say that OPEC sees the market in surplus in 2026, which we have no idea really how that came about. Our market report does not project any surplus in 2026. We do not preempt any ministerial decisions that must happen. As you know, we have an agreement in place that ends in 2026, end of 2026. And in addition to that, there's the group of 8 countries that meet on a regular basis, a monthly basis actually, to take the necessary decisions while they have been carefully, gradually, and cautiously returning barrels to the market over the past, I would say, almost a year. So that was the purpose of clarifying. The statement we issued was to clarify to the market that there is no mention of the word surplus when it comes to market balances. The report, to be fair, does talk about trade surpluses when when you look at the economic section of the report. But in terms of the market balances being in a surplus or a deficit, our report does not talk. Now, these could be some assumptions by the journalists or the writers that wrote these stories, and that's their right to make their own assumptions. But those assumptions should not be attributed directly or indirectly to the OPEC monthly report.
So even if the OPEC oil market report doesn't state a surplus, many analysts out there still see the potential for a looser market next year. What's your response to that?
Well, I mean, everybody has their right and their opinion. They're entitled to make their own assumptions. We don't know what every analyst out there has as assumptions. For us, our assumptions are clearly stated in our report. We see still next year, and of course this year, robust global economic growth at around 3.1%. We see oil demand still steady this year at around 1.3 growth this year versus last year, 1.3 million barrels a day. Now, some people will say this is on the higher side, but actually it's not, because when you look at, for example, the EIA, they're at 1.1 million barrels a day, which is very close to our numbers. The consensus out there for many of the analysts and specialists is about close to 900,000 barrels a day almost. And I'm sure with the revisions that we'll be seeing in the coming months, we will be seeing upward revisions. Let me remind you, Dan, in the beginning of this year, everybody was talking about how bad demand outlook was for 2025. And then slowly demand started to prove itself to be more resilient than those negative and bearish picture. And people started adjusting upward. I think the only one which is still hovering at around 700 or so thousand barrels a day year-on-year growth is the IEA. The rest are all at above 850, close to 900,000 barrels a day, and some at around a million. As I said, the EIA in the US is at about 1.1 million barrels a day, close to our number. For 2026, we see demand at almost 1.3 million barrels a day as well, similar to this year levels. And we see non-OPEC plus supply declining next year to around 0.6 million barrels a day growth versus this year where we see it at around 0.9 after we made that small adjustment. Of course, when you look at that, it reminds us of the infamous or the famous story about the missing barrels. So as we see these revisions being made, will be made towards the beginning of next year, the missing barrels will suddenly appear, and then people will start to revise their numbers because they have been undermining demand growth this year. As we have seen, it's not something new. We're used to it, and we've been seeing this happening repetitively over the past years or so. So our demand outlook is still strong. We see non-OPEC plus supplies dropping next year to 0.6. And we see the call on OPEC plus actually increasing next year. So we see a strong market going into next year.
What's really interesting here, and of course I can't offer my own explanation, but just looking at the numbers, I'm glad you've mentioned it, because there is about a 1.8 million barrel per day gap between the IEA, the EIA, and the OPEC forecast for next year. That's the widest that we've seen in more than 2 decades, in fact. So what do you think actually explains this divergence that we're seeing?
Well, again, I mean, it's different assumptions. The IEA has been known to be on the bearish side always, yet. I mean, I've said this to you in previous interviews on various international fora. We've seen oil demand set new records year after year. And so has gas demand, so has coal demand, despite, all the calls for a peak in fossil fuels that we've been hearing from the IEA and many others. The records are there, the facts are there, the numbers are there. I cannot explain why the IEA has lower numbers. I think that's up to them to answer. The EIA actually is very close to our numbers, Dan, and even on the longer term outlook up to 2050, they're almost identical with our numbers. And, it's different assumptions, different modeling, basically. And for us, we are confident in our numbers. We believe year after year, our numbers have been close to being on track. And we've seen others follow suit, coming closer to OPEC's numbers as the year progresses.
What is the one thing that you think markets aren't appreciating or maybe not understanding about the long-term demand story right now?
Well, I think the one thing that has been underestimated is the resilience of oil and the resilience of oil in the global ecosystem, let me put it that way, and how useful oil is in every aspect of our daily lives. People just came away after 2020 and then got carried away with the IEA's net zero by 2050, calling for a peak. But then, when you look at oil today, gas as well, it's in every aspect of our daily lives. And I think people underestimate this. And therefore, there was an underappreciation about how resilient oil demand would be. And I think this is now proving. We've seen even the IEA came up with their latest world energy outlook. I think it's called the WEO, I think last week, where they came back and they reinstated the current policy scenario, which is very close to our scenario. And we welcome that reinstatement by the IEA. We look forward to working closely with our colleagues at the IEA on a technical basis to develop some sort of ability to compare notes. We already do that under the umbrella of the IEF, but also we would like to work closely with them on a direct basis to get a better understanding. Because as you said, this divergence is not good for consumers around the world. It's not good for producers around the world. We have to work together to ensure energy security, energy stability, and affordability for the whole world. And that means we have to be able to give policymakers a clear signal about really the real true track of where energy demand is going, and that includes, of course, oil. So we saw the revised numbers in the WEO issued by the IEA last week at, I believe, 119 million barrels a day. In fact, when we convert that into a volume basis, it reaches, in our calculations, 121 million barrels a day, which is very close to OPEC's 123 million barrels a day by 2050 in our WOO, the World Oil Outlook.
Do you think this confusion is also part of the reason we are seeing oil below $60 a barrel still in the fourth quarter?
Well, I think it's not the long-term issues are different. I think on the short term, there's been a bearish tone that's being done including by some of the reports, like the report we talked about yesterday, that narrative that's being constantly pushed. I mean, let me counter that narrative by putting some facts on the table. We have refinery margins globally at record highs, still, meaning two things: that demand is still strong, and there is a tightness in refining capacity, despite our constant calls for investment in refining and investment in oil. Net long positions are still high and going up. This is for ICE Brent. I don't know if it's visible or not. We'll share these slides with you. For products as well, we're seeing the crack spreads for products and the net long positions showing significant strength. The inventories globally are still way below the 5-year average, historical 5-year average, which you use as a benchmark. And the market is still in full backwardation. Despite all the things that are being said, the market is in backwardation. So the story was first about bearish demand, bearish demand, bearish demand, until it got boring. Then the new story became about China's mopping up all the crude and taking it to fill its SPRs, and that got boring. Then it became the story of oil in transit and oil and water. And we have looked at the numbers. We follow all the numbers. We have looked at numbers of oil on water or oil in transit. And believe me, these numbers are not unprecedented. We've seen them before. As far as in 2023, oil in transit has not been as high as it is, like people are saying that it's historical high. And, to be fair, unless there's a new economic phenomenon out there, for my 30 plus years in the oil business, I've never seen people storing oil when the market's in backwardation. It does not make sense. If there's a new phenomenon out there that some reporters can explain, then maybe, it's time for us to learn about it, because to my knowledge, you don't store oil on ships when there's a backwardation. You don't store oil, period, when there's backwardation.